Can you imagine Lewis Hamilton questioning his radio engineer with an, "Are you upset with me or something?" in full career? That happened in Canada. And the worst, Ferrari did not even respond. What is happening within the most legendary team of Formula One? The Canada 2025 Grand Prix was, in theory, the ideal opportunity for Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari to consolidate a relationship that, since pre-season, had presented itself as one of the most ambitious bets of modern motoring. The expectation was high. Not only because it is a classic circuit in the calendar, but because the data collected in the simulations of Friday and on Saturday showed a reasonably competitive Ferrari SF25 in mixed conditions. The medium traction sectors and the piano's management of the Gilles-Villeneuve circuit represented a technical challenge that, however, was no stranger to the Hamilton driving style. Everything pointed out that Sunday would be a promising day. From the exit, the British pilot maintained a consistent rhythm, avoiding errors in the first round, administering temperature in the brakes, a critical appearance in Montreal, and retaining the tires without great shocks. But on Vuelta 8, a completely unexpected element altered the course of events irremediably. In one of the fastest areas of the circuit, a marmot broke into the track. At a speed greater than 260 km per hour, the SF25 could not avoid it. The impact was violent and frontal, and although from the outer chambers it seemed a minor incident, the hidden damage was devastating. The lower right part of the flat bottom of the car, one of the most delicate areas of the car in aerodynamic terms, was severely damaged. Ferrari estimated that the loss of aerodynamic load was around 20 points. In terms of performance, this meant that, back after return, Hamilton lost half a second compared to its ideal rhythm. In a category where the differences between the first and the 10th can be less than 3/10, this technical impact was synonymous with competitive sentence. Lewis at first tried to adapt. He reduced his aggressiveness in the braking and slightly modified his trajectories to minimize the effects of the imbalance. But the loss was structural. In each fast curve, the car simply did not respond. The stability of the rear axle had disappeared, and the grip in the traction areas was intermittent. What followed was an uphill race. Without tools to defend himself on the track and with an advanced degradation of his tires, Hamilton was exposed to the pilots coming from behind. What could have been mitigated with an adequate strategy by the team became a series of trial errors. Ferrari's boxes wall decided to extend the first stint far beyond the rank recommended by Pirelli and the single-seater sensors themselves. This decision, apparently based on an erroneous reading of the career rhythm, caused Hamilton to fall into traffic when leaving boxes after his stop. The car had no rhythm, and now it didn't have clean air either. From that moment on, any possibility of fighting for the podium disappeared. As if that were not enough, in the second stint brake problems began to emerge. According to Hamilton himself, temperature values began to fluctuate. The lack of stability of the car forced to stop more aggressively in areas where it is normally dosed. This unusual demand on the thermal system ended up completely destabilizing the car. By then, Hamilton only thought about finishing. It was no longer important to add important points for the championship, but to save the integrity of the car and ensure at least one decent presence in the finish line. That it ended 6th, behind his partner Charles Leclerc, who without great displays managed to fish for a 5th place. The most painful fact is that Leclerc, starting from a lower position, managed to stay ahead without major complications. It was a race in which not only the car betrayed Hamilton, but also the strategy, technical management, and the context of the team. This Grand Prix, for all its details, became a brutal metaphor of the Ferrari season. Potential without execution, speed without control, and a historical pilot trapped in a system that does not finish understanding it. Silence in a Formula One career is much more than the absence of sound. In the case of Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari, the silence that was lived in the Canada Grand Prix was a deafening statement. Throughout his career, Hamilton has been a teacher to convert the radio of the team into a tactical precision tool. In Mercedes with Peter Bonington, he developed a connection that transcended the technical. A relationship based on mutual trust, the speed of response, and the millimeter interpretation of each phase of the race. That synchrony was invisible but decisive. In Ferrari, that network collapsed in public. What happened on the radio during the race was the clearest manifestation of an internal fracture. In the midst of technical chaos and the loss of performance, Hamilton asked his engineer Riccardo Adami, "Are you upset with me or something? You are not answering the question." The phrase, loaded with tension and vulnerability, was a supplication disguised as sarcasm. It wasn't just a complaint, it was a total disconnection signal. For a pilot like Hamilton, accustomed to receiving constant feedback, the absence of answers was equivalent to blindly flying. And this episode was not an isolated accident. It adds to an increasingly worrying sequence of misunderstandings, strategic disagreements, and late responses that have characterized the 2025 season. Already in the Miami GP, Hamilton ironized the team with a tame break for T when the box's wall took to react to a key change in the stop window. That irony, although disguised as a British humor, contained a fierce criticism of slowness in decision-making. In Canada, that accumulated frustration exploded. And he did it at the worst moment, in the middle of the race, in front of millions of spectators. The problem is not only technical but emotional and structural. Riccardo Adami, his engineer, seems not to have managed to establish with Hamilton the level of symbiosis necessary to compete in the elite. In a category where careers are defined by microscopic margins, a second fraction of communication delay can mean losing a position, an opportunity, or even a championship. And in Canada, the feeling was that Adami and Hamilton were not running the same race. The one was looking for tactical information. The other seemed absent, disconnected, or unable to give clear answers. This situation has caught the attention of experts and Excopians. Juan Pablo Montoya, known for not having hairs on his tongue, was categorical in his analysis. He said that Hamilton urgently needs to change the career engineer and described Adami's attitude as unprofessional. Not only for his silence in Canada, but for his apparent inability to respond under pressure. For a pilot who has built his legacy on the basis of operational excellence, this lack of response is a betrayal of the effort that each lap represents. The silent radio in Canada was more than a communication failure. It was a scream of help. A plea from the cockpit of a car that got rid of under his feet. And it was also a warning. If Ferrari does not react soon, they will not just lose points. They will lose one of the best pilots in history. Because in Formula One, when the pilot stops believing on his team, the race is already lost. Even before it starts. In the heart of the debacle lived by Lewis Hamilton in Canada, there is a silent protagonist who cannot go unnoticed. The Ferrari SF25. This car, designed to be the definitive evolution of the SF24 that was so close to the title in 2024, represents a technical paradox. A car that, in theory, has the tools to compete for the championship, but in practice has proven to be a puzzle too complex even for a 7-time world champion. From the first shakedown, the engineers in Maranello knew they were betting on an extremely aggressive aerodynamic architecture. The philosophy of the SF25 was based on a reinterpretation of the concepts of airflow and load balance that Ferrari began to explore in the middle of the previous season. Bareful internal channels were introduced, a remodeling flat background to maximize the soil effect, and a total diffuser redesign. All this with the promise of gaining time in medium curves and high speed without sacrificing traction in slow outputs. The objective was clear: build a car capable of rival McLaren in classification conditions, without losing consistency in a long round. But in that search, Ferrari ended up creating an indomitable beast. The SF25 is fast, yes. When exact conditions are met, ideal track temperature, controlled tire pressure at the millimeter, and total traffic absence. But outside that very narrow margin, the car becomes an unpredictable creature. The slightest change in external variables, rain, side wind, deposited rubber, completely transforms their behavior. And in Montreal, everything that could go wrong went wrong. The damage caused by the animal's outrage was the catalyst, but the root of the problem is how the car responds to the imbalance. An SF25 in perfect condition can gain tenths easily in classification, but an SF25 with partial damage loses not only aerodynamic load, but also coherence in energy, traction, and braking management. In other words, there is no error tolerance. The car does not endure damage like other cars. This was evidenced when Hamilton reported that after the impact, he felt that the car did not react predictably or in slow or quick curve. It became an erratic, nervous, and difficult to take the limit. The challenge for engineers is double. On the one hand, they must balance a platform that is already unstable under pressure. And on the other, they have to communicate their decisions in the race to a pilot who demands clarity and speed. Neither of those two aspects worked in Canada. While Hamilton struggled with a visibly damaged car, confusing, late, and sometimes non-existent messages arrived from the wall. The problem was not just hardware, it was of human software. The pit wall management was slow, dubitative, and without response capacity to a crisis. Even when the car is at its ideal point, it continues to show worrying symptoms. In wet conditions, for example, the tire temperature operating window seems incompatible with the general SF25 strategy. Engineers have failed to establish a reliable pattern of car behavior in sessions with moisture or low temperatures. This makes it particularly vulnerable in circuits such as Canada, where conditions change quickly and the career strategy depends largely on the car's ability to adapt. In addition, the SF25 loads with another structural defect: the lack of synergy between what the pilot feels and what the data says. Hamilton has been clear in his statements. What he experiences at the wheel does not always coincide with what engineers show him on the screens. This disconnection between the feeling of the pilot and the analysis of the team generates a critical gap in decision-making. A fast car is of no use if the pilot cannot trust his reading. And if the equipment can also correctly interpret the car's signals under pressure, then the performance becomes anecdotal. After chaos in Canada, the question that inevitably emerges is not just tactic or technical. It is existential. What path is left ahead of Lewis Hamilton inside Ferrari? Because what has lived in Montreal is not a simple stumble. It is a symptom. And in Formula One, when the symptoms are repeated, they cease to be accidents and transform into patterns. The scene of a visibly frustrated Hamilton, questioning its engineer, trapped in a car that does not respond, cannot be taken as an isolated event. It is the natural consequence of a structure that is not yet designed to support a pilot who competes to win every second of each lap. Hamilton's dilemma is both internal and external. Internal because he still believes he can compete at the highest level. He said it, he didn't come to Ferrari to retire, he came to win. But how many strategic defeats a pilot like him can tolerate before motivation is erased? And external because his presence in Ferrari implies a constant expectation. Of the press, of fans, of young engineers who see it as an almost mythical figure. If that expectation does not become results, it runs the risk of becoming a load, in a shadow, in an awkward noise. At this point, Riccardo Adami's continuity as his track engineer is no longer a technical issue. It is an emotional survival decision. If Ferrari wants to avoid an internal collapse, you must intervene. Redesign the communication protocols, review the decision-making scheme, and above all, create a structure around Hamilton that makes it feel part of a competitive project.